Welcome back, everyone. Rasheedat Fetuga is our guest. I'm not botching her name. I've got it down. And she is the CEO and founder of the group Gideon's Army here in Nashville. And before I even move on to get into some of the issues here, how many people do you have working? Do you have full-timers? How much, I've gone over to volunteer. How many volunteers do you need? Do you have? How is that going? I'm sure you'll say we can always use more help, right?
We can always use
donations.
More help. Yes, and donations. So we have 10 full-time staff, 9 contractors.
Great.
And we have had thousands of volunteers, especially because of the volunteers during the tornado. Then we have corporate volunteers that do very specific things.
And it's not just primarily focused in the North Nashville area, right?
It is. It's
okay.
Primarily North Nashville, but we've got some really special projects on the way that we're going to need volunteers from everywhere. So we're working on hospital-based violence interruption and having just community people, community volunteers supporting families who have been impacted by gun violence, like in the moment. And then we're working on a restorative justice pilot in the courts as well.
Before we get into the criminal justice system and some things, kind of headlines in Nashville over the last year or so, we are going to take a couple of phone calls. Rob's been holding patiently. Rob, thank you, sir. How are you? Go ahead, Rob. Yeah, go ahead. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm going to be kind of off topic here just a little bit.
Okay.
Back when I was growing up, man, I'm down here in the country. We loved Sanford and Son. Loved to have, my favorite show was that what was it? Dang it, with JJ. But anyways, get past that. Make a statement here. Denzel Washington made a statement, and he said that, and don't quote me for it, but if there's not a father in a home to raise a kid, there's a bunch of fathers out on the street. It's something to that. And I believe that's true, not being, no racism about it. It's white, black, Mexican, any nationality you want to call.
Yeah.
But that's all I wanted to say. If there's not a dad in the home to kind of teach, which the mom, don't get me wrong now, the mother is very, very crucial and important too. But yeah, I think, they need a father figure. And that's all I'm going to say.
Okay, that's a good point. Good point, Rob. Thank you. And not just specifically a father figure, but a lot of these kids are growing up in single-parent homes. So whether it's a mom or dad or grandparent raising, and it to be an issue. It's a problem a lot. And some single parents do very well and succeed raising kids, working hard. But yeah, what do you say to that?
I would say that is true, and that there have been systemically and intentional things that have happened to take fathers out of the home. However, and I can't remember the source, but there was a study that said fatherhood is actually on the rise, that children are being raised more in two-parent households. And also, just because two people don't live together, it doesn't mean that they aren't being parented by, a village. Children need a village. And even beyond necessarily the two-parent home, as long as there's a collective, our children can be okay. And that's why it's really important to have neighborhood and community systems and school networks and as well.
And everything's got to be connected. I want to go back to something that you said about the system. And we've heard this a lot, and I know that it's politicized, but I think there has been a shift recently in the last few years where people are being educated a little more. People are listening a little more carefully instead of just kind of saying, oh, yeah, well, that's not really an issue. But yeah, it may not affect me as a white male, but you and others who may live, have grown up in a whole different world compared to me. So there's a lot of listening now. I want to talk about, like you said, in the criminal justice system, there's a big push, and there has been some good steps with criminal justice reform. And we just did a story the other night of some of the, when it was the big war on drugs, some of these guys, men and women, were getting these huge sentences for very small, what today would be a very small sentence or slap on the wrist, you know, as we move to decriminalize some of these small amounts of marijuana, whatnot. So things are changing. They're looking at some people. We just put a lot of people in prison.
Yeah.
And that some, you know, absolutely probably could deserve it if they're really terrible crimes, but some of these low-level crimes just decimated families. And so now we're seeing the consequences, some of it, right?
Absolutely. I think that it's really important for us to begin to look at crime and violence from a public health perspective. To decriminalize drug use in general, I think, you know, that would be the only thing really that I would want. Not even just these small amounts of marijuana, but using harm reduction strategies, mental health services, building healthy communities and healthy families is really the only way, because criminalizing people for drug use, especially in high poverty oppressed communities, it just doesn't even make sense unless it is intentional to destroy those communities. Because why in the world would you do that, especially when now the FBI, you know, has opened their files and there are records directly from the FBI saying that the government planted drugs within communities and then started a war on drugs. So, you know, even though we did not start these problems, we didn't start these issues, we still continue with that same momentum. And at some point we have to stop and really look at and re-envision and be creative and redesign our systems and our policies and everything. I get really passionate about this because, like, working in North Nashville, and you see people like North Nashville, even up and down Trinity Lane, like you see people who are desperate. They don't want to live this way, but there aren't the resources, there aren't the housing resources, there aren't the drug resources. They are arrested for these things.
And why aren't they? I mean, we know there are so many great nonprofits who are trying, but obviously it's not enough. It's still not enough. And it's still not enough from the city and the state and the federal government. And how do we get more?
It's not a priority for our state. It's not a priority even for our city, because we continue to invest on the back end. We continue to invest in policing and in mass incarceration instead of divesting from these things, investing up front in creating healthy communities, and then reducing the need for policing and mass incarceration. And so it clearly just hasn't been a priority, or we would do things differently. It's not as complex or complicated, I think, as people would like it to be.
Because you've been out there even before Gideon's Army started, and you know your neighbors, you talk with them, old, young, black, white, gay, straight, whoever, who are living in these conditions, and you've heard their stories.
Yes.
So you know firsthand now about how you can easily get stuck in a cycle, and it's vicious. It really is, right?
It is. There was a young mom during the tornado. She was white and living on the streets on Trinity Lane, and she was pregnant, and we housed her for a little bit, you know, just really trying to help her to get on her feet. The tent where she was staying, it ended up being like destroyed in the storm, and so that's how she ended up on Trinity Lane. She went and stayed with family, but like her family structure wasn't very solid, and so she was just kind of in and out. And you know, what do? You send people, but then there are waiting lists, and it's just not enough resources. And I really feel like the city, I feel like Nashville, I know that Nashville can be a model city. Like, I really, really believe in Nashville. I believe that we can be a model city, and that we can really begin to shift our thinking and invest in creating healthy communities, work more closely with the Department of Public Health to reframe drug use, to reframe violence, look at these things from a public health perspective, and begin to get people help. begin to invest in these communities, building healthy families. Like one of our first funders is Department of Human Services.
Right.
And love those people, to Jen, so much, because what they do is the same as Gideon's Army, but they really got behind us in supporting whole families. Just looking at what are the needs of the entire family and then helping us to build structures to support the entire family. If the city did that, just citywide, if we began to look and build restorative justice models, transforming our systems, looking from a public health perspective, like it would be so beautiful, and we could be a model city for the nation. And that is what I see for Nashville, and I am not going to stop until we get there.
I don't think you are, I can tell.
Not.
But we do have to pause to take another commercial break.
Okay.
Got a couple of callers on holds. Hang on, callers, we'll get to you. And up next, I'm going to play a little devil's advocate. We're going to dive in here. Stay with us.